Okay, hello everyone, and welcome as you filter into this webinar. Just get comfortable, get some water if you want, stay hydrated. We're going to be talking all about data centers and co-location with greenhouses with Resource Innovation Institute. So we're really, really happy you're here. Just hang tight. If you want other people to participate, you can still send them the registration link and they'll be able to join throughout. So if there's someone you think who might want to participate and learn from this, that's great. We will be sharing the recording of this with all the people who have registered. So stay tuned for that. But we encourage you to stay through the whole webinar because we're going to have live questions from you. And I've already received a bunch from the audience. So we want to make sure we get into that. So thanks so much for those that have come on time. If you've just joined, we're about to begin our webinar on data centers and greenhouse co-location with featuring a Resource Innovation Institute, which you'll learn about in a moment. But first, let me just give some Zoom etiquette. Okay, so if you look here, you've got a chat function which should be open. And in that chat, we invite you to introduce yourself. Who are you? Let us know who you are. Secondly, we'd love to know where you're calling in from, zooming in from. We have a global audience, and this is a global topic, actually. So we really want to hear where you're from. Also, just think about what your intention is for today's Zoom. What are you hoping to learn? And if you have any questions throughout, you can use the Q&A. It's a little square button there with Q&A, and you can give us questions and answers throughout the webinar, and we'll be pulling in some of those. It also tracks them, so sometimes we follow up with answers that we don't get to. So with that said, I will just introduce myself briefly before we get into the meat of today's conversation with our two guests. I'm Henry Gordon Smith, the CEO of Agritecture, and since 2011, I've been just crazy about controlled environment agriculture. I've been researching it, blogging about it, visiting farms, making predictions, and I still do that today. But the difference is that our blog has evolved into a global consultancy, so we actually design greenhouses, vertical farms, urban farms, and more recently, regional food system planning and master planning related to this. We don't need to talk too much about what I've done and what we've done as a team, but it's global work. So we've worked in 45 countries. So if any of you from around the world think you could benefit from our feasibility studies now or in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. But today is really about our mission to share knowledge, that original DNA of Agritecture and me as an original blogger. So this is us reaching out to Resource Innovation Institute after hearing about their 4 recent reports to complement their additional research that they've already been doing to standardize and make CEA more efficient, more, let's say, digestible for policymakers, and really help the industry overall. So they do incredible work, and we're so happy to feature them today. Specifically, we have 2 great minds from RI here. We've got Derek Smith, who's the executive director and founder of the Resource Innovation Institute. And then we have Rob Eddy, who I'm getting to know a little bit more these days, who's the sort of in-house horticulturalist. How are you both doing?
Great.
Great.
Excited
Honored
to
to
be
be
here.
here.
Great. So happy you're here. Thanks so much. Let's just start with you, Derek. Just give us a short intro to who you are, what you're about, and maybe the inception of RI if it's not in your slides.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing us together, and thanks for all the work you've done over the years to make these types of conversations happen. My career has been really about bringing the public and private sectors together to accelerate solutions on climate and energy challenges, with the belief that through collaboration and transparency, we can really make big changes that we, of course, know that we all know that we need today in today's society. So, Resource Innovation Institute has been doing this type of work for the past decade, initially supporting governments and utilities as they were facing the oncoming wave of cannabis operations and not knowing how much energy was being used, how to drive efficiency through that system. We've been working in the food sector for about the past 7 years, initially with USDA, more recently with Department of Energy and states. We really focus on research and education, and Rob is our key player in making all that happen with the market.
So, Rob, tell us about you.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with the intersection, the overlap of people and technology to grow plants. It's always quite amazing to me how much thought and technology goes into growing plants these days. I'm a horticulturalist by training, a greenhouse person. So I spent 3 years at what is now Corteva Agrisciences as their horticulturalist at their R&D facility. And then I spent 20 years at Purdue University managing their greenhouses and growth rooms and growth chambers. So I was in charge of hundreds of experiments, in different kinds of environments, either applying optimal environments or stress environments. So is a lot of fun. I left Purdue after 20 years to become a consultant because I loved the big projects, and I was also volunteering for RAI because I loved what RAI was doing. They were really bringing the science and objective information to the cannabis industry at the time, and also they just have just a great work ethic. So I really enjoyed it. And I have a background in an academic background in horticulture as well, a BS and a master's degree from Purdue University. It's great to be here. Thanks, Henry.
Okay, we got the right people here. So, Rob, you can pull up your slides.
Yep.
Everyone, we're going to start with like a level setting presentation from RII about this question of data centers and colocation. And then we're going to get into some questions from me. I'll be able to see your questions and we'll open it up to answer the audience questions. So there should be sufficient time on that. So let's get into it. Rob, I think we can see your screen and we're all ears.
All right. Well, I'll start and then I'll hand off to Rob for a little bit more of a technical conversation. I'm gonna address sort of the policy and vision aspects of this. So we all see this world today, right? The massive investment in and the build out of data centers to power the AI needs of society these days. We feel the strains on the electricity grid. We hear about rural communities pushing back. These are generally, small rural farming communities that are economically challenged where these data centers come in and locate. And at the same time, for those of us that have been working in CEA, we have this hope that CEA can really be part of the food system resilience that we need in society today. But we also know that new economic models are needed to make that happen. So we feel there needs to be a new vision, right? What if we can leverage all this data and energy infrastructure that is coming to us from the data center world to advance regional food security? What if we can integrate large-scale food production centers in key regions of the U.S. that are buoyed economically by co-locating with these data centers? Go to the next slide. So we did a research project with the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is the #1 jurisdiction in the world by far with the largest concentration of data centers. And they're, of course, a leader in CEA as well. And long story short, we found through research, interviews with 20 plus market actors from data center development all the way to European actors who've done some of this co-location, that this is both feasible and strategic. It's really not it's not a technical issue. There's a lot of technical issues to solve, but they are solvable. What really is the secret is to aligning the public and private sectors to make this happen. And that's what we say is that the way we can unlock this coordination is through a concept called farm parks. So farm parks are regional resilience hubs with integrated food, energy, data infrastructure. That's the highest level description we'll give. But it's essentially a business park, right? It's a new type of development. And I'm going to go through 5 ingredients that are needed to make this happen, and then a little bit of an understanding of the sequence to make this happen. So ingredient number 1 is we of course need a data center. The data centers are operating on a really tight timeline. They have contractual commitments. They need to hit a certain pace, right? And what we're envisioning is that they essentially have CEA ready data centers, essentially stubbed off pipes that can connect to a later set of infrastructure that can then add greenhouses to it. Because we cannot slow down their pace. It will not work if we do that. So, and they're also not going to figure this out themselves. They need the support to make this happen because their core business is data center development. So the second key ingredient then is a central resource hub where the interconnection can take place, where the waste heat from the data centers can be moved into the greenhouses, where the CO2 from the energy systems can also be pumped into the greenhouses, where water loops can connect all of this transition of materials around. And importantly, with this central resource hub in the middle, you can decouple the data center and greenhouse operations. So the data center maintains its operational security. But the key is, how do we finance this central resource hub? How do we insure it? How do we govern it to make sure that all the parties that want to access this exchange of resources can do it in a way that works for their business? And then the third ingredient would be the large high-tech greenhouses. And of course, with a scale like this, we're talking 1,000-acre development and 200, 300, 400 acres under glass, right? Something we have not seen here in the U.S. We're going to have the opportunity, the scale opportunity, to actually bring in a lot more than just lettuce, right? So we can have a basket of goods, we can fill trucks coming out of this out of this business park to serve regional needs at a scale that we've never seen with CEA. And then with all of that, we can bring in the cold chain, the logistics, and other key service components to really build out this park and this food production center. In Virginia, they talk about, well, if we're going to have tomatoes, we might as well have a salsa plant right next to it. Or we're going to have tomatoes and other crops, we might as well have a salsa operation, right? So food processing, etc. And then if you really think big picture, and we're working with economic development agencies that love to think big picture. They want to address investments in multiple sectors at the same time if they can, and they have money for robotics, they have money for all kinds of issues. So can we bring these resources and investments together to help build what the region wants and what the region needs to really build this out? We could have university research, we could have biomass processing as part of the energy mix. There's just so much that we can do here. And if we do all this, this is $5+ billion of economic development. I think that's a pretty conservative number at this scale. This is creating 1,000 jobs or more. This is not just 50 or 100 jobs in a single data center. And we can really make a dent in feeding people, right, through CEA. So how does this all come together? It comes together in phases. We're really just in research phases right now with a few jurisdictions that have got data centers and they have an interest in CEA, and they're trying to do these feasibility assessments. What would it take to make this happen? How much would it cost? What would the returns to us be? What kind of investment would we need to make? How can this public-private partnership really make this happen? So we haven't seen a lot of development and construction in the U.S. at this scale, and the reason is it just falls down with this public-private coordination. So in the small print are the services that we hope to provide to the public sector, to the data center developers, to help make this sort of thing happen. So this all makes sense, because these data centers bring a lot of taxes to these communities, more tax revenue than they've seen. I mean, they're building schools out in a pretty impressive way, but there's not a whole lot of job creation, and there's not a whole lot of other benefits, and there's some impact that the communities are resisting. So we feel like a vision of farm parks rather than just data centers would really help communities be able to accept more development. We can do this in a way that doesn't impact the data center development pace, and we can really build out business clusters, multi-sector business clusters, and the workforce talent pools, because we have this concentration. And all of this can be adapted in both rural and urban settings. The final thing I'll say before I hand off to Rob here is that this whole model is informed by our work in the past 2 years under the U.S. Department of Energy CEA Accelerator, where we did a partnership with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And we created a bunch of tools and resources that you can see here and you can learn more about. But the point is that all of this is leveraging into this strategy. And to tell you more about the technical considerations, I will hand it off to Rob now. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump into the technical considerations, of which there are many, but I'm just going to touch on the top three, the three greatest hits on this. The first is low-grade waste heat from the data centers. How should we deal with that? The second is CO2 availability. I'll go into all these in more detail. And I know there's people from both the CEA world and people from the data center world here, so I'll try to explain some of these horticultural aspects of it. And the third is the big one. It's an energy mismatch between data centers and greenhouses. And obviously, you can see I'm going to be abbreviating data centers, DC, and greenhouses, GH, in this presentation. As Derek said, these are the information we're providing you is from our working groups. We establish industry working groups of growers, equipment manufacturers, utility providers, academics, and governments, and we bring them together for working group meetings, and then RAI writes, has reviewed, and then publishes these best practices guides, which are available to you for free on our website. You can see some of the titles here, but we've been really focusing on some of the big aspects of CEA because that's what we're going to need experience with to create something like a farm park. So low-grade waste heat. A standard greenhouse needs 170-degree heating water. That's how they heat the greenhouse with hot water. It runs through pipes. Just think of a radiator in an apartment, okay? Legacy data centers are air-cooled, but what they're building now are water-cooled ones. And you really can't heat a greenhouse with hot air. It's just you can't transfer it, a half a mile away. Just not practical. So none of this is practical even 2 or 3 years ago. It's now that the water-cooled data centers are coming online because the data centers need water-cooled because the AI and the really intense computing they're doing is generating more heat that can't be taken out of the data center with just by air exchange. So you can see the temperatures of today's water cooled. It's not quite up to 170, 140. I mean, you could probably heat a lot of greenhouses across the country, certainly in the lower half of the US with 140-degree water. But let's talk about getting it up to 170 so these could be built anywhere. And the way you do that is with a heat pump. And Derek was talking about decoupling of the facilities, and this is where it's important. Let's look at this diagram first that I got on the bottom right. This is a very simplified diagram. On the right is a data center, and on the left is a greenhouse. In between is a heat pump substation. So you see the red and blue pipes coming out of the data center. That's the red pipes are the hot water that's that's transferring that heat out of the data center. Normally, it would go to that little box with the four circles, which is a cooling unit that the data center owns. Normally, it goes there, comes out cooled, and goes back into the data center. What we're proposing is you tap into that heat rejection loop. That's what you call that loop that I just described. And you have it go to the heat pump heat exchanger for the greenhouse system. And that would exchange that heat. And again, the water is not mixing. It's just it goes to a heat exchanger and comes out on the other side of the heat exchanger for the greenhouse. But you also use a heat pump to raise the temperature. So it's as easy, I say this, and the engineers are gonna sigh. It's as easy as kind of stubbing off this heat rejection, these connections to this heat rejection loop. That's what we mean by CEA ready. And also having, of course, the protocols about when you're going to do this. It's got to be during probably a maintenance period for the data center. So you've got to put a lot of thought into that. But having the substation decouples the buildings and decouples the construction timelines. Because again, we don't want to get in the way of the data center's construction timeline. Second consideration is CO2. Greenhouses need CO2 to enrich the environment with vaporous CO2, and that increases photosynthesis. And with most plants, that also boosts yield. So greenhouses do this as a great way to increase yield that doesn't cost as much money as turning on lights or bumping up the heat. It's pretty energy efficient. But you got to have a source of it. And greenhouses now use liquid CO2. They have it shipped in, and they store it as a liquid and distribute it to the greenhouse as a gas, or they can use it, they can scrub the exhaust from their boilers that they use for heating. And that works, but the problem is sometimes you need CO2 when you don't need heat. So you're running your boiler when you don't need the heat just to get the CO2, not very efficient, okay? So the problem is that using a data center's waste heat, there's no source of CO2. So the solution for that and the solution for other things is to have at the central resource hub combined heat and power units. These run on natural gas. They're turbines. They create heat and power, but they recapture that heat, so that's a very efficient component, 90% efficient or so. So they provide heat. We probably wouldn't need the heat because we'd be using heat from the data center, right? But if you can with hot enough water, you can run it through an absorption chiller and create chilled water, which is what I'm really excited about. Because the chilled water, you can dehumidify a greenhouse and even air condition it, or certain sections of it. And of course, it's providing power. And of course, since it's natural gas combustion, it's providing CO2 that can be scrubbed and put in the greenhouses. Second mismatch, or maybe this is our last mismatch. The energy mismatch is startling, and this is what we discovered when we were working with Virginia. This is just a silly chart just to give you an idea visually. I mean, a 200-acre greenhouse may only require 40 megawatts of energy, and a lot of that being heating. And a data center with an AI one might be as high as 280. I mean, so just way more than the greenhouse could ever use. Also, the mismatch is a problem of timing, because the greenhouse doesn't need heat all the time. It depends on the month. As you can see, the chart on the left here, each month is a different amount of heating, and on the right is just during the course of the day-night cycles and weather cycles. So it's not a constant requirement for the greenhouse. So solving this energy mismatch is what is the model that would work? I think it's obvious now that a one-to-one model isn't going to work because it's just too much heat. A district heat model where you have discretized heating in lots of buildings, whatever they would be, different industries or residentials, it's still only working with the low grade heat. And so there's some problems with that, and it doesn't have other utilities in it that the greenhouse and the farm park could utilize. So the farm park model, as we discussed, is a very diverse agribusiness hub. Again, refrigerated warehouses, they would need chilled water, they would need energy all the time. Food processors, packagers, you can see that you can, with all of these things moving in, including equipment manufacturers, robotics companies that would want to use, they could then rent robotics to these greenhouses or subscription or pay to use. There's a lot of magnetism, a lot of gravity that would pull industry into this farm park, and that would match the heat exchange over the course of the day. I'll shut off the sharing here and thank you for your attention to this, and Henry, you take it over.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Derek and Rob. And I really wanted a presentation that sets the stage. And I think you did a great job covering what I will sort of break into two buckets. One is the sort of, let's say, politics partnership piece of this, right? Like what an farm park, we're calling it, right, takes. And then Rob, of course, on some of these technical limitations. I think our audience is interested in both. So let me kick things off with just a few questions related to that. Derek, when we think about the farm park idea, it looks like massive, right? It doesn't look like it's like one data center, one greenhouse. Rob talked about some of the technical reasons why it's not one to one, but why so big? Is it relating to the place that the feasibility study was about? And what are are there ranges and variations of them you perceive, or is it just that you just have to have that kind of scale for it to make sense?
Well, there's just so much waste heat. The economics get better if you're able to use that waste heat. And for the data center, what they're after is reducing capex for their chiller infrastructure. So the more waste heat they can push out, the less chiller investment they need, but also
Okay.
their OpEx can be improved. So, and then obviously scale is important to CEA. That's the basic answer. 1,000 acres is a polygon that we talk about. It really can be scaled, and the economics can be addressed in a number of different ways. Yeah.
Well, it's a cool idea as well to even think about such a centralized greenhouse community on its own in the U.S., since that doesn't really exist like it does in Leamington or Spain or in the Netherlands. And I still think it'd be exciting for the U.S. to have its own version of that, especially leading in some circularity. I'm interested a little bit in the politics against stakeholder side of this. So obviously you've got multiple stakeholders that you've had to engage, and a big part of your work is doing that. But can you tell us a bit more about the different sensitivities of the stakeholders? Like what matters to whom? The data centers, what do they really care about? You talked about speed, et cetera. They don't seem to want to change things, but what's your perspective on what the data centers, the greenhouse operators, and let's say maybe the policymakers, care about? Those three groups. What have you heard as you've engaged in these conversations?
Yeah, yeah, great question. The data centers need they need a reputation improvement, right? I think
Yeah.
by this point, there's hardly anyone that likes data centers, and we have one data point, but I think it's insightful. We're working with a data center in North Dakota. We're evaluating the feasibility of this co-location with an existing data center, and they have adjacent land. And that's a key thing. Is a lot of these data centers buy up all this land. They have
Right.
the land to do this actually, and they may be interested in actually financing the greenhouse infrastructure because they have a lot of capital. So think about that. The CEA sector doesn't have capital,
Yeah.
right? Um, but back to your point, this is one data point. As this data center developer in North Dakota was doing a town hall and talking with community members, which of course have a direct line to the state agencies and the other public officials, right? And they're frustrated. What are you doing with all this energy infrastructure? What are you doing with all this waste heat? And quietly, they're saying, well, we're looking into this farm park concept, and maybe bringing agricultural production back to this rural community and improving the economy in more ways. But we don't want to go out there and say that yet because we don't want to make a commitment we can't live up to. So this is just a research phase right now.
Mhm.
But the community member was like, why didn't you start with that? I would have had a lot more interest in what you were talking about and what you were bringing to this community if you started with that. So again, one data point, but I think that is very emblematic of the conversations that are happening out there and that need to happen.
It's an urgent issue. I mean, I've been to Virginia, I've been to these counties. We work with one that has all these data centers, and people are really concerned about the noise, the looks of them, the energy they're
Traffic,
consuming, the
yeah,
water, the whole thing. And you just said it well in your introduction. There are serious challenges for counties and leaders to get the tax benefit for this inevitability of these data centers, for all the use we have from them. But yeah, if we could bring in co-location, how exciting would that be? Okay, we're actually getting a lot of questions. So I'm going to go over to you, Rob. One of these is just a question about, does this only work in cold regions? You talked about some of the variations, but where do you see the limits or the ideal places for this, or where it might not work so well?
I don't know enough yet to be able to say, but here's what I do know. It can be used everywhere. It's a matter of where can you make the economics work. And for example, up north in North Dakota, let's say, you it's very cold. Greenhouses typically don't like cold places with a short summer and not much sunlight. But you can get the most value from waste heat in that kind of environment. You can get like in North Dakota, you have 8 months heating season. So if you're getting a lot of value from using that. But then again, on the other hand, technically, when you get to a really cold region, it's much easier for them to reject the heat, the data center to reject the heat. It's almost like they don't need the greenhouse as much up there
Mm.
because it's just so cold. It's easy to do, and you don't even need to use any water evaporation. So in that particular case, they're not consuming any water except for like a 10 GPM pipe that goes into the data center. So the question will be up north, will the economics work?
Mhm. To be seen, but thanks for that answer there. This was a question we got, did the feasibility study only look at greenhouses? Some of these are in the chat, some of them in the question tool, but did it only look at greenhouses as co-location, or were there other CEA solutions? I assume this question relates to vertical farming. I think Rob, you can help us understand why or why
Yeah.
not that might make sense.
I,
I know you're focused on CEA,
yeah.
as people understand it as greenhouses, but there's probably other things like recirculating aquaculture
Yeah.
that might be possible. Tell us what you've looked at, what you haven't, but what do you think about other types of CEA
Well,
like vertical farming,
in
for
a, in
example?
a, in a nutshell, they're all welcome to this agribusiness hub. I think
Yeah.
you need the greenhouses because greenhouses can be scaled at that way. You don't, but of course you need, be great to have mushroom producers. It'd be great to have vertical farms. And it'd be great to have aquaculture. And when I think about vertical farms, I think, oh my gosh, yeah, then the vertical farms could be focusing on perhaps propagation, where it's
Yes.
really, really great to have, and they could be selling transplants to the greenhouse. So there's all sorts of synergies that happen once you've got that gravity.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the vertical farm itself generates heat. It doesn't need the heat, right? Just as
Yeah,
much as the
good point.
greenhouse will.
Good point. It
But as
needs
part
cooling.
of the co-location and the circularity, right, the mushrooms could produce some CO2. For
Yep.
example, there's different models of them connecting. So to be determined, but greenhouses make sense for obvious reasons because of what they need as far as heat is concerned and the CO2 and the scale. Okay, great. Fantastic. So just to answer to everyone, Carrie had a question here about the reports. I've dropped the link in the chat. You'll definitely get the follow-up, but there's tons of reports from RI about this topic and others. But there's the link to the feasibility study and the co-location report in the chat if you want to see it. We got a bunch of questions from our friend Eric Saley, and he's quite technical. Let's see if we can get into some of these. But some of these are about, like, I think, technological advancements. So I don't know if you know about some of these, Rob, but uh, Eric is saying here, Bloom Energy make energy servers which produce excess heat but no combustion waste. They're being used, and apparently this is popular. Any thoughts? Are you aware of that system, Rob or Derek? Any comments on that?
Say the system again. I don't think I'm familiar with it, but explain it one more time or give me the
Well,
name.
it's Bloom Energy, and it's, I guess, servers that produce excess heat but no combustion waste. That's a more technical question for me. So
Well, yeah, that's like data centers, right? They don't, that's the problem. The data centers don't create a combustion waste. So you
that's what
have
we're talking about.
CHP, or the greenhouse could just choose to use ship in liquid CO2. The one thing I would say is that it's pretty vital because the liquid CO2 supply chain has faltered in the last 5 years. And so it's become frustrating to have a good supply chain. And so a greenhouse that's getting it from their own CHP, or then they know they've got a stable supply.
Okay.
So there's no reason why the technical solution that our listener suggested couldn't work. It's just that there's lots of workarounds. If it doesn't have combustion, that's okay. We can use CO2 somewhere else.
Yeah, there's a couple of others here in the Q&A that maybe you want to look at, Rob. You can also type answers if it's more appropriate. I'm going to move on to some of these other ones. Stephen Ong is asking about another technology that might relate. Obviously, you said agri-parks can have a lot in here, but what about agrivoltaics as a piece of this in the greenhouses? Is RI looking at that at all in some of your research and how it could fit into these agri-parks?
We haven't done a primer for agrivoltaics, but of course we're paying close attention because we feel like it's a vital technology, and it's really caught fire with the research community, and we're seeing examples of it being rolled out. We know about the microdot technique,
Right.
the quantum dot technology, and also 3M is really pushing a lot of new products that would shift spectrum. So all these are great ideas, but we're not going to be the ones who dictate the technology used by the greenhouse. So of course we're thrilled by it, but we're not in control of that. We figure the greenhouse growers will have a better know what's best for them to buy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we've
the
seen.
agri-park will evolve in its respective feasibility study, and the greenhouse growers will choose what tech they want. And that goes back to a question I had with you, Derek, though, like as far as the operators of these, right? The sort of operating structure for this shared infrastructure, right? Do you see it being under the data center as the landowner? Do you see other third parties coming in? What are the conversations you're having showing you about what the governance structure of these agri-parks might be?
The central resource hub in particular.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I think the whole thing, right? So if we're assuming it starts with a data center, right? And then this data center group does a feasibility study, they've got the excess land, and they decide they want to go forward with an agri-park approach with
yeah.
that central hub, and then a greenhouse develops. They might lease that greenhouse, right? They're not going to operate it themselves in many cases, who knows? But is it all sort of run by the data center groups, or is there some third party that's going to be managing it? Like, what do you think it's going to look like from a governance and management perspective, since it's not the core business of the data
Yeah,
center?
exactly. Yep. Yeah, it will be a third party entity. The land, I think, can be addressed in a number of different ways. It could be a private entity, it could be a public entity. A model that we're looking at that one of our jurisdiction partners is believing in is it's a new type of public utility that actually governs all this, with the theory that the public, that's what the public sector does well, right? It manages common assets and governs them well. Streets, you name all kinds of infrastructure, right? So that's a model, but again, it could be a private entity just as well. I don't
Yeah,
think it's going to be the data center. I think that's not the business they're in, right?
yeah.
But they're interested in accessing backup power, reducing their need for all these generators to flare to test, the backup systems that they have, and is there a way to tap into this greenhouse energy infrastructure in case the grid goes down, right? So we just have to think about the way this is all structured, and obviously the legal agreements and the way the resource exchange, who has the top priority in a grid shutdown. All that needs to be addressed, and that's going to be part of our next research phase with Virginia.
Exciting. So
Yeah.
let's go into that regulatory piece a little bit more. Gretchen from Glaze, which is another incredible organization, and CEA should investigate. They do education and research as well. Asks, what solutions do you suggest for overcoming the regulatory challenges for establishing thermal energy networks? It's kind of what we're talking about here. And who is in the best position? We talked about operations a little bit, but I guess what what Gretchen's trying to get into is like, what are the main hurdles still? Who should overcome them? And yeah, what are other gaps that maybe people like us, even consultants or greenhouse growers, what are the opportunities for us to sort of stay ahead of the curve for what we hope will be development of agri parks that we can be involved in?
I can't speak to the regulatory issues with thermal energy networks directly. I mean, all of this needs to be addressed in a coordinated way, right? The design needs to be thought through from the beginning, and the regulatory and policy pathways need to be laid out from the outset, right? So it takes a lot of front end, everyone getting on the same page to really make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about the urgency
Rob,
from
did you?
data centers, like that they're very fast moving. They're sort of like behind schedule. They're trying to catch up. That's sort of like a culture and attitude of how they're building. And then I think we have CEA, which is, I mean, I think we think we're fast, but we tend to be kind of slow. So this question from Timothy, I think sort of relates to that. And again, we're having open questions, so let's see and what we can answer them. But the data centers seem to be on a very aggressive timeline. And is CEA far enough, advanced enough to sort of fit in with them to make the farm parks feasible? I guess maybe a more interesting buildup on this question is, what can CEA do to actually align better or meet the sort of culture or needs of data centers? What are things that operators could do or the sector could do?
I don't think they need to. I think these are separate businesses, separate sectors on
Agree.
potentially separate pieces of land. So the data center does what it does. Importantly, that's a really key piece of this. They don't have to change anything. They might have to have comply with some standards, not comply, not in a regulatory sense, but they might need to address
Yeah.
how to be CEA ready, and they might have to do a little bit of integration of that concept into their construction timeline. But other than that, they don't need to do anything. And again, if they want to finance this, if they want to see that this is another business line for them, that could open up a whole new way of looking at their own business.
Okay, so CEA and greenhouses, you do you, be ready to connect, to share the data, I suppose, right? Like for these feasibility studies, these conversations, maybe the RFPs that are going to be coming out related to this work.
Yeah, and then the CEA infrastructure can also be um, rolled out over time. We
Yes.
may not start with 200 acres right out of the gate with
I
eight
agree.
different crops, right? So and the CHP systems can be modularly, integrated over time as the greenhouse infrastructure builds, right? And the data center just does what it's doing all the while.
I agree. That's the mantra. Let people do, each entity has to do what they do best and not try to make them do anything differently. I would say going back to going back to the regulatory environment, there's so much momentum with these projects because they represent such great tax revenues that it's not just the local community, the states are getting involved as well. Again, that regulatory environment is something for policymakers to figure out. That's what they know how to do best. So we'll hopefully leave that to them. What CEA producers can do to get ready is they're already making siting decisions. Where do we want to build next? And they know what their criteria is, so they could begin to think where would that fit in. And basically, it might just come down to is what is the what we're gonna it'd be beneficial for us to be in a farm park because it would lower energy costs. Just how low would it have to go for us to green light this project? It's gonna boil down to it's very complex, but it's gonna
Yeah.
boil down to economics like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it's important to emphasize the decoupled recommendation you have, right? Like, so these systems can't operate independently, but they have a co-location benefit. I think that was also one of the questions about like, what about energy storage and excess energy that might happen with all these systems together? Is that something that you all have looked at?
We've certainly looked at or asking the questions about would thermal storage help? Now
Yeah.
the battery type storages, I'm not going to talk about that because I'm not an engineer and I don't understand it enough to talk smartly about it here. But greenhouses already are using massive hot water tanks to store energy. There's an opportunity to not only smooth out the day-night cycles because greenhouses tend to need heat in the night and sometimes not in the day, but also you can save a certain amount of that heat from the summer into the fall months. You can build it up and save it. So we're asking that question about where that fits in, and then if you're far north, you need to bury those thermal tanks, and is that economically viable? I don't know. So this is why we ask those questions.
But
Yeah.
this farm park concept is essentially a lab for innovating on all these topics, right? And having the policy and regulatory pathways mapped out to enable ongoing innovation. And we have landed on the economic development agencies who are dealing with all this data center development as the key venue for addressing these things. Economic development agencies are used to addressing regulatory hurdles based on whatever sector they're bringing in and smoothing out policy pathways. So it's different than an agriculture department, right? I don't know that this is as easy to scale with a Department of Agriculture. I think Department of Agriculture should be involved, and there is a lot of or some ag innovation money, but working with economic development agencies, I think it's key.
Yeah, I think that's an important message you've emphasized over and over again, right? Like RII is doing these feasibility studies, getting this information out there as part of your mission and your objective, but there's a lot of other stakeholders that have to do their part on
Yeah.
regulatory smoothing or tech innovation, et cetera. Um, Martin Vanderhoot wants to throw this on its head a little bit, right? Like, what about bringing data centers to greenhouses? Why are we bringing the greenhouses to the data centers? Like, could we have decentralized, smaller data centers that are providing heat for greenhouses? Could that work? Why or why not?
I'm going to jump in first. Derek will answer it better, but the data centers have they've got their own way of doing this. They keep it very close to the vest. They're looking at things that greenhouse growers would not even consider. Things like fiber optic, how close is the fiber optic lines to
Yeah,
that
that's a big
transmission
piece.
lines, etc. Derek?
I mean, we have the ability now to use the CEA siting tool that we developed with Berkeley Lab to find where it's most optimal in the US to locate greenhouses because
Mhm.
of a number of data points the GIS data layers are connecting to local jurisdictions to identify all kinds of soil, elevation, labor, you name it. So we have that, but yeah, I agree with Rob. It would be, and there's different segments of data centers. It's not all just hyperscalers, which is primarily what we're talking about here. So there are smaller data centers doing different types of data processing that it could be relevant, but CEA doesn't have the capital I think
Yeah, I think
CEA's got
Rob,
to follow.
yeah, I think like Rob with that point about the the cables and that infrastructure they require. It's one of the reasons why there's so many in Virginia, right? And that's part of that infrastructure that's there. So, for them to bring that somewhere else. But I mean, you could see policymakers in some markets saying, we don't want this in our, residential neighborhoods, which is where they're going very often, but you could put this in our sort of semi-industrial CEA areas, possibly, right? It's going to be really up to them. Right now, it seems very reactive. Like there's so much money going into it. They're moving so fast. Like you said, some of the counties are seeing 30-40% increase in their budgets from the tax revenues from these. So there's real like good and potential coming from them, but it's just moving so fast, it seems like. So let's take a step back from North America a little bit. You all have, I imagine, spoken to people around the world. I know you're going to the Europe soon again, Derek. But is there anything you've learned from the Netherlands? Of course, this is a question we always ask. Let's go to the Netherlands and learn from them, or in Europe for some of these concepts that may have fed into your work. Are there any case studies? Are there any best in class learnings, whether it's from regulatory or stakeholder or technology that you found in Europe or elsewhere?
Well, we have our friend Martin, who is connected to some of these things. So, yeah, we're learning a lot from the Netherlands. We've done Rob's written best practices on what the U.S. can learn from these high tech regions, including southern Ontario and elsewhere. Um, we're learning that how to scale, right? How to actually think about CEA at a different level than what we really have here in the U.S. How to do what is done over there within a U.S. context is going to be a U.S. solution. So
Mhm.
there's only so much of the learning, the technical stuff we can learn, right? How to adapt it for this market is going to be a U.S. solution.
Fantastic. Eric, we got a question here about, okay, so like it's a little bit hard, right? Because there's this, we're hearing about this rapid expansion of data centers. Maybe you can give us some context about what is probably going to happen in the next few years based on the data. Because I've seen some where it says we're overbuilding them. So we're going to have a bunch of data centers that are going to have excess capacity, which let's talk about what that might mean for this concept, if at all. And then we've got now ideas of putting data centers in space or underwater or whatever. Like, are we too late for this actual window of opportunity? Is our data centers going to be less relevant or move off Earth by the time this farm park model is sort of developed? What do you think?
I'll jump in first, just technically. I keep looking for what is that technology that I don't know anything about that's going to I'm going to read about in the New York Times tomorrow that's going to make this all fall apart. But I don't have I had not come across anything, and maybe some of our listeners might pose that question. The thing is I explained to me by a real engineer as opposed to just a horticulturist like I am, was that you're putting all that electricity into those things. There's no way it's not going to come out as heat somewhere. But I don't know about doing it in space. What I do worry about is for the farm park. One of the things is the CHP units, and those are everybody wants those. Data centers want those. Everybody wants. There's a real backlog. I mean, you can't order one and get it any sooner than 2028. Of course, the construction timeline for these projects is a long period, so it could be like savvy general contractors know how to order ahead of time and make that all come together. But I do worry. I don't worry so much. I've not heard any reason why the data center boom will not continue. Maybe some of the audience has, but I do worry about the supply chain for certain things. Derek, you got any comment?
Nothing to add, really. I mean, stranded assets happen in all kinds of industries, and they're addressed through economic systems.
Along
We
the
will probably have to deal with it. Yeah.
Along those lines, let me answer one of the questions. Henry, I've been typing some answers in, very brief.
Thank you.
So don't
There's a lot. There's a lot coming in. I'm trying to
Yeah,
get through
if
them.
you're reading my answers, they're just really brief because I'm trying to listen. So
Yeah.
don't think I'm not taking you seriously. But one of the questions was, what happens if the data center goes out of business? Great question, because Henry, you're talking about will the boom continue? The other question is, will the boom end in 20 years, 15 years, and they shut down? or they come up with a better way to do it and they build a facility somewhere else. So that's one of the reasons why we like the farm park model, because if you have the CHP, the Central Resource Hub, that still remains. The greenhouse can still remain. The jobs can still remain. What the community would lose would be that great tax infrastructure. But it's better than not having the greenhouse there, because you'd lose in 15 years of the data center shut down and you just got a couple IT uh, places around co-located, then it all goes under.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point as well. And making the agri parks sort of like their own free zone or ag parks. Some of those exist already, but just having some circularity in it, and the data center is one piece of it and not all of it. I love this question from Nadia Sabeh because I think it brings us back to like the issue we're talking about to some extent, and something we care about in both CEA and sustainability, which is it's the environmental damage of the energy consumption of these data centers that's like the major concern. So Nadia is asking, has anyone here done a calculation estimate how many greenhouses we would need to co-locate with data centers to have some impact on offsetting that energy consumption and this sort of rampant use of AI and the various carbon footprint and energy costs of that? I mean, do you do any of this work, taking a step back and saying like, if we put greenhouses next to all the data centers, this might be the impact? Do you do anything looking at that kind of scale to think about the possible total impact, even in the US market?
I mean, we haven't. I don't. I think
Hard.
this is
Yeah.
going to be optimized in a few key regions, and the economics are going to work in certain places. I appreciate the abstract question, but I don't think that's anywhere near how it's going to come to take place.
Mhm.
I mean, frankly, we'd rather focus the research energy into where does it make sense to do this? Where can we make this make sense, right?
Yeah,
To
which specific, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
So
too
that
big
goes a
of
little bit to, oh, Rob, do you have a comment?
no, just it's too big of a question for me to. I'm not qualified to try to answer it.
It's an interesting one. Maybe someone can answer it. Someone put
Yeah,
in
I
the
hope
chat
so.
there some tools related to it. But even just in Virginia, right, where most of them are, like that's an interesting question as well, because we have CEA growing. Certainly, leadership wants to do CEA. How much, like these questions like how much food could be grown in these greenhouses in agri parks? How much carbon would be offsetted? I mean, those are interesting questions at some point at scale. I wanted to give a moment for Lena because she gave us a very extensive question here. And Lena is from Topion, which is Neom and Saudi Arabia's food company. So they're planning all these farms and in this futuristic city, and a very interesting project, certainly. So she has a number of questions and it's hard to get into them. But Rob, I would love if you could share a little bit more about, I don't know if you see this question here from Lena,
Yeah.
643, but like, we talked about the scale one. So, yes, it could be scaled up and down, but what about like hot climates like, Neom in Saudi Arabia, for example? What are some things that would change or look different from the agri park you maybe are thinking about already? Any realistic or, you know, conflicts that you foresee with that? I mean, certainly greenhouses in that climate mostly depend on energy for cooling versus heating, right? So that's the big difference. How might that translate to this relationship with data centers and some of the tech and energy flows?
The only thing I could think of would be because I'm really not qualified to talk about greenhouses in that region. Is what you just said. If they could using the hot water to create chilled water,
Mm,
so
that
that
could
you
be
could have,
one.
yeah,
And so
either the CHP. I think you need waste heat from a CHP, or up to like 180 to make that work. I think Nadia Sabag and other folks could correct me on that. It's about 180. So either you're going to have uh, a different level of the water seems to keep getting hot, the waste heat keeps getting higher as the data centers are getting more compressed with how many racks they put into their data rooms, but it may not ever get to 180. So it could be CHP would have to be where you get that hot water to make chilled water.
got it. I might need to go through your diagram again for that. Well, we're reaching the end here, but I wanted to just take a moment to go to you, Derek. I mean, I asked experts around the world in CA to make some predictions. about 2026. We heard all kinds, some really interesting, including from Gretchen on the call here, who said 2026 is the year of CEA retrofits versus CA construction. There were a lot of interesting ones about integration into healthcare, a lot of things that relate to this, like ideas of co-location, ideas of fitting CA in with other things. And yours was that sort of the first large scale farm park with this in mind will be developed. I mean, can you tell us a bit more about your vision and your hopes for
Announced, not
2026?
developed.
Announced, not developed. Yeah, love it. Announced.
The
So,
development will be underway.
any other hints on that juicy prediction or?
I mean, a lot of jurisdictions are thinking about this, and there is competition that's building about who's going to host the first farm park, and there's motivation in with these states, these economic development agencies to really figure it out. And we're diving deep in the economics for all parties right now, and the economics are going to be different in different regions, but it seems pretty clear to us that there's a will and there are economic puzzles that can be assembled with a variety of resources to make this happen. So where there's a will, there's a way. There is definitely interest among a small handful of jurisdictions to make this happen, to make an announcement by the end of this year.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic, and I'm grateful to Derek and Rob for joining us for this Thai webinar. So many questions still that need to be answered. I'll be looking at them and thinking about them as I write more about this subject and promote various research and work going into it because I find it really, really fascinating. And so I want to appreciate and thank everybody for joining today and listening in. I know we just scratched the surface for this topic, but so much enthusiasm, so much curiosity. So please let's check that out. We had about Carrie, just to answer your question, we had about 300 plus registrations and I think 150 at its peak moment who were joining here. I think Derek and Rob, there was a question for your emails if you're willing to share it again or share that screen, Rob, that last one there. And again, we've had guests from all over the world today, which I'm truly humbled about. So thank you so much for participating. And I invite you to check out the Resource Innovation Institute, their reports. You're going to definitely see them at upcoming events like Indoor AgCon, I assume, and some others. So definitely keep in touch with them. There's Derek's email in there. We will be sending this recording to all the registrants and publishing it on YouTube. So thanks for being part of this conversation, and let's have a great 2026 together. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Henry.
Thank you,
Let's
Henry.
think bigger.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, think bigger. I love that. See ya. Bye, everyone.